All right, so I said we would talk about soul work today. And I have a cheat sheet. I'm not giving you guys a cheat sheet, but this is what it looks like in the journal. And don't worry, I will go through the steps. And I think it's good to get the steps down, but also don't get too hung up on the steps. So the purpose of this is to acknowledge and abide with an unresolved mystery. And acknowledging is important. Sometimes we know right away, what this big life question is. Sometimes we're very aware. Other times, maybe we're not. Maybe subconsciously we know. But I mean, this I think is one of my MOs to shove it away and breathe it away or meditate it away or yoga it away because I don't want to face it. And there might be times when you just have absolutely no idea what your question is. But this is us bringing things into view, right? It's moving through the mist to see what's there. And then abide is the other important piece, I think. And that is simply, we're not looking for a quick answer. I'm not going to sit here for 20 minutes and solve all world problems. And that's not the point. The point is to just immerse yourself into that question and see what happens. And there are some steps. The first step is to take a snapshot. And remember, this is Joe. I am just telling you my take on Joe's journal. But it's a brief, you briefly visit that mystery in the form of a question. And so right now, if you have a question, you can write it down. If you don't worry, you will have some time later. But sorry, I'm looking at my notes. They're over here on another screen. It doesn't have to be like a beautifully written question. It doesn't have to be fully formulated. Do be aware that you might start with one question and then it may change. And let it change. You don't have to be stuck on like, oh, this is my question. That's kind of interesting to see, where it might go. So, start somewhere, even if your question is, what's my question? Honestly, I think that's a fair question. The second step is to take that question into meditative mode. And I think about that poem with the coins at the bottom of the well. You're just going to drop that coin gently into the deep well and watch it drift down and see where it lands. And you breathe in your question, whatever that may be, and you breathe out the words, don't know. I think we've heard Joe talk about that before. So this isn't an entirely new practice for a lot of us. But the trick is to be present. This is where we're abiding. And I know if I have the habit, just like many of us, where something really good might come up and the goal is to abide. The goal is not to write a treatise on your question. And you can remind yourself. A little trick I use sometimes is when I do get really into like, oh God, I really want to remember this so that I can write it down because it's super good. I often will say like, or I'll ask that thing that comes up to come up again when I'm writing. If it's really important and if it's really something that needs to be recorded, I will just say like, show me yourself later when I'm doing my writing. And I can remind myself too, like if it's important, it'll come back up. It is really okay to let it go because we are just here to abide. And then, whatever that experience is, you will have times. My goal is to give you plenty of space to come up with a question and then sit with it for a little while. And there will be then time to put your pen to paper and just see what comes out. This, first, when you're in meditative mode, you're listening with the ear of the heart, storing that all here. And then when you're writing, you're letting your heart speak, giving your heart permission to speak, which honestly, how often do I do that? I'm not even sure. So it's nice to have just some time to let your heart be the guide. And trust the process, really. Like, trust that when you come up with your question, and trust that when you sit with it, that whatever comes out, even if it's a bunch more questions, this is how it's supposed to go. Right now, you're priming the pump, and eventually the water is going to come out. And it might be a week or a month, who knows when, but you are starting that process, even just being here, listening to me. You're starting this process. And Rilke, quoted by Joe, is our guide here. The well-known, have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. So again, just the reminder that we are not trying to figure it out. Now, I did this practice recently when I was at Loose Leaf Hollow, and I'll just walk you through how it worked for me to give you an example. And it's certainly different every time. You never know. But I didn't have a question at all. But I'd already been at Joe's for a few days, so I was already in kind of that mode, and since I was there with Joe, I had somebody to talk it out with, somebody pretty experienced in these matters too. So that was helpful. And we bounced some ideas back and forth. And the one that landed best for me was, how am I meant to love the world? And that comes from Joe's first poem in Green Bamboo, which I think is his first book of poetry. And that really felt like a good place to start. It's broad enough that I'm kind of casting a wide net. I definitely didn't have a preconceived answer. A lot of times, if I go in with a question I've already been kind of wrestling with, I have this idea of like what I want the answer to be. And for this one, I didn't at all. That can also be sort of an uneasy place to be so wide open. But for me in that moment, it felt good. And it landed well for me because Joe and I had been talking about this already. And so I think maybe this even was one of those like sort of unconscious things that was sort of percolating around. I have a project that I'm working on for my job, and I was feeling super uncomfortable because really I'm more visible than I wanted to be, want to be. So the poem, I'm going to read it to you, really resonated for me. So anyway, my question was, how am I meant to love the world? And here is Joe's poem. I'm going to offer it just in case it helps you with your question, and also just because I want to read the poem. What matters? It doesn't matter if the world chooses to accept or reject your act of love. It only matters that you love the world in the way you were meant to love it. So that's beautiful. It's a beautiful statement. If that resonates for you, great. But here's the rest of the process. So I went into meditation with that question. I can't actually remember if I had a good meditation where I was like doing all the things, or if my mind was jumping around. It was an unremarkable sit. How about that? And Then when I put my pen to paper, some surprises came out. And I thought I would just read my writing in its raw form. So you can see how it just kind of came out on the page without me doing a lot of thinking. So where does this lead? How am I meant to love the world? And where does this lead? What am I doing? Where am I going? I don't have any answers. Feels open and expansive, setting a trap for God. Where does this lead? What is the next right thing? Just keep saying yes. The figuring out part isn't your business until the next step appears. Don't look too far ahead on the path, you'll get lost. Fear tells a false story, same as resistance. Pay attention to them, listen, acknowledge, but be skeptical and don't be quick to abandon the path. Discernment, stillness. Art thou in the darkness? Mind it not and be still until the light appears as a guide. Trust. There will be tests, challenges. This means growth, expansion. How am I meant to love the world? Don't know. That's a life question. Keep asking it. Use it as a compass. Check your position once in a while. Check your course. Adjust as necessary. What choices do I need to make that bring me closer? What will lead me on the path of loving the world as I'm meant to love it? What leads me in that direction? What leads me away? Follow my own star. Discernment, stillness. Stillness is a form of action. Listen with the ear of the heart. Keep saying yes. Open-hearted, heart forward. And that's it. And when I looked at it again later, it's so interesting because it turned into a conversation of me asking questions and then my soul giving answers. None of those answers came from my brain. A lot of them came from like previous experiences or little bits that I've picked up here. So I think that my soul anyway speaks to me in symbols and language that I can understand because I've lived that. And at the end, my question did change. It went from how am I meant to love the world to what will lead me on the path of loving the world as I'm meant to love it. And that surprised me. I didn't expect to have that question change. So be ready for surprises. Listen with the ear of your heart. Whatever comes out is what needs to come out now. And trust the process would be the things that I might leave you with right now. And you all have a process. We've been doing this for a while. So I think that's all I want to say right now. So we can go ahead and stop the recording, John, and then we'll get into meditative mode.